the enemy. First, you always look at your opposition first. What would they do? What are they trying to do to us? Because we have to maintain a high tempo. We have to outpace our competition. It's not being driven by your inbox day after day, week after week. It's about doing things now and shaping the future so that you're driving the type of emails you want in your inbox. Bottom, I have my tactical, I have my managers that are making sure the work gets done every week. Well, how does that work getting done every week translate into getting us to achieve our strategic goals? A more shared understanding. And if you have shared understanding, you have teamwork, and we have good, seamless teamwork, you're faster. Your tempo's high. You're likely going to outpace your competition. Where does uncertainty fit into the picture here? The longer out that you're going to plan, the more uncertainty you're going to have. So what success looks like, think of things in terms of that. What does success look like? If you look at it from the other way or the other point of view, if you're not planning, if people are just doing their daily grind, weekly, not thinking about the future, when that opportunity comes, you're not even going to see it. So before you dive in and start working on your own stuff for your team, first find out what your supervisor and maybe the one above that person is trying to achieve. And make sure we have two basic functions. We're going to envision the future, and then we're going to arrange the actions needed to get there. In simplest terms, as the way the book puts it, it's thinking before doing. The way I was always taught is you start with top-down guidance, and then you have bottom-up refinement. Every leader must also be a planner. This is the only way to make sure that you're solving tomorrow's problem instead of remaining fixated on what you're dealing with today or today's problem. That's how I look at the difference between leaders and managers. Managers are solving the problems of today, which you need, but leaders are thinking about the future. In the Marine Corps' planning publication or document, MCDP-5 or Marine Corps Doctrinal Publication number 5, Planning, which are free, by the way. All these are available on the internet. You can Google MCDP 12345 and download a PDF copy. They're great books for any business leader or anybody that's really just interested in developing a tactical or strategic mind. The document is written for Marines to prepare for combat, but these are the same dynamics that you experience in business, in sports, in just about any situation in life. And what is a doctrinal publication? It's going to show you things to consider, ways to think about solving problems. It's not going to tell you how to solve them. And it's certainly not going to give you a scripted procedure to do so. The most important planner is the commander, or in your case, it might be the leader of the business. Because while everybody can be a planner, the commander should be the one that sets that top-down guidance or structure for everybody else to make their sub-plans or contribute to the larger planning effort. The way I was always taught is you start with top-down guidance, and then you have bottom-up refinement. The experts that will execute, they're going to refine that plan, but you have to start with that top-down guidance in order to provide focused direction and to save time. Hi, I'm Mike Targos. I'm a retired Marine infantry officer. I served 21 years, deployed around the world, including Afghanistan and Iraq. Iraq, I was a battalion XO or executive officer. And in Afghanistan, I was in charge of 1,017 guys spread out all over Helmand province. And in 2013, I transitioned out of the Marine Corps and went into project management, engineering, and sales in environmental services, where I've been ever since. I founded Center Desk Leadership Coaching in 2021 to help people become better leaders and managers, particularly those who have not had any formal training. The first of 3 chapters of the planning publication or book is The Nature of Planning, and it starts out with a quote from Napoleon. "Nothing succeeds in war except in consequence of a well-prepared plan." In short, planning is about envisioning the future and arranging the steps or the actions that we need to take to make that future a reality. And right away, the book draws a distinction between a process and a procedure. And a procedure being more sequential, more step-by-step, that helps you solve a certain problem or accomplish a certain task. So we look at planning as more of a process or an iterative series of thinking about things, taking action, testing, trying, imagining, and giving the commander or giving the leader of the organization different options to choose from. And this is all taking place in an environment of changing situations and a lot of uncertainty as well. And because our situations are so uncertain and continuously changing, we have to adapt the way we plan or adapt the way we think about things. We have 2 basic functions. We're going to envision the future, and then we're going to arrange the actions needed to get there. But think about your day and think about your week or maybe the way that your business runs. A lot of times we don't even take a second to envision the future, but we step right into execution. And a lot of times that is more familiar to us. We have the most experience in that, and we dive right in thinking maybe we're going to save time or we don't need to stop and envision the future. But only by envisioning the future does that really guide the tasks that you need to accomplish, the different ones, the things that you may not have already thought of or may not have experience in. There's this old expression that once the first shot is fired, the plan goes to hell. And to a certain extent, that's true. But if you don't plan, then what you are is you're continually reacting to situations instead of being proactive. By going through the planning process and by thinking about what could happen, the people that are participating in the execution are more likely to be expecting those changes, less likely to be surprised. So, in simplest terms, as the way the book puts it, it's thinking before doing. Now, although planning is a continuous process, things change, it's iterative, you do have a final product of planning, which is the plan. And this is the communication to the rest of the team on where we're going and what needs to be done. And the plan provides what the book calls a basis for action. It allows people to make decisions at their level because if done properly, what you've done is you've laid out the priorities. You maybe have done some phasing or sequencing where you're shifting resources to accomplish certain things. It's providing a framework for other decentralized action, which is critical if you watch the warfighting videos of why that is needed, because we have to maintain a high tempo. We have to outpace our competition. And our plans have to support what our supervisor or what the other leaders up the chain in the organization are trying to achieve. This is called nesting of plans in the military, which is if I'm at platoon level, if I have 30 Marines with me, I'm part of a company, which is about 120. It doesn't no good for me as a platoon commander to come up with my own plan if the rest of the company or the company commander is thinking something totally different. So getting back to the top-down guidance and the bottom-up refinement, that's exactly why you have that, because you are then going to enable people to do their own planning at their level because they know big picture what the larger organization is trying to achieve. It's called nesting. So before you dive in and start working on your own stuff for your team, first find out what your supervisor and maybe the one above that person is trying to achieve, and make sure what you're going to plan to do is supporting what they're trying to achieve on a bigger scale. What's the value of planning? I mentioned it a little bit already. It's not getting caught up in today, and it's a way to stay focused on the future without pulling too many resources away from doing that. So in the military, depending on what level you are at, you're going to have a planning section, or you're going to have dedicated planners. I got that training. I served as a planner on a staff in Europe. And if you can afford to do this, and a lot of small businesses probably can't afford to do that, but you do have to, if you can't have specific people set aside, then you're going to have specific time set aside. Otherwise, all anybody's going to work on is the problem of today. Before you know it, you've gone through that 3 years, flies by, and better off. You're still doing what you were doing at the beginning of that time period. But it's also one of those things that's really easy to say and hard to do. Dedicate some time and effort to thinking about the future and framing out the actions to get you to those future goals that your organization needs. And the core belief there is that by putting the time in to think about the future, you're going to make things better off for where you are in present time. There's 4 reasons that good planning is essential to an organization. The first one, and think about this in the context of war fighting, which is we have an opponent that's actively trying to defeat us. Maybe for you, it's your competition. But the first reason is to allow your team to seize the initiative, to drive your goals onto your competition or your opposition. It's being proactive. It's not being driven by your inbox day after day, week after week. It's about doing things now and shaping the future so that you're driving the type of emails you want in your inbox. The second is to avoid a time lag between when something happens and when you can take action. And if you think about this in terms of a combat environment, it's not being surprised and stunned by something the enemy does that you weren't anticipating. You do a plan and you make your people aware of what could happen out there. You take a look at the enemy. You always look at the enemy first. You always look at your opposition first. What would they do? What are they trying to do to us? And in that process, you're preparing people for the eventuality that things are not going to go your way, and you're going to kind of shape their thinking on how to react when that does happen. Or if you look at it from a more proactive point of view, you're going to give people the information needed and the guidance needed to exploit situations. Does somebody in your team know what that means to the success of the overall plan? And are you the type of leader that has really empowered them to make the decisions that they need to keep moving, to keep making decisions? And if you watch the warfighting videos, you know that a decisive action or a decisive success is something that has an effect larger than itself. So it would be more than the $1 million sale. It would be, we sold something for $1 million to a new key account that has 10 million or 100 million more in opportunities in the future. That's an example of a decisive action. If you look at it from the other way or the other point of view, if you're not planning, if people are just doing their daily grind, weekly, not thinking about the future, when that opportunity comes, you're not even going to see it. And even if you do see it, you're not going to be able to exploit it. Thirdly, we could find ourselves in situations that are so complex that there's no way the team is going to be able to fight through or survive or execute through that environment. I'm pulling up a picture of the Schlieffen Plan here from World War I. And if you look at the arrows in red at the top, this is a large number of troops and equipment moving over a great distance in a short amount of time. And this plan was actually based on the railroad timetable. So the planners calculated how many people they could move, how much equipment they could move by rail. And that's actually what drove the timing of the plan and the sequencing. So you can imagine if there was no consideration given to roads, rail, or logistics in any sense, it just would not have been possible to execute. So you may find yourself in something like that. Maybe you have to do a full reorganization. Maybe you have to change the technology, the tools that your company uses. And you're just not going to buy these things and people are going to learn how to use them on their own. You got to have a plan to bring that stuff in, to implement it, to show people why things are important. And there'll be sub all of that need attention to make sure that they're arranged and planned for or anticipated so that they're all falling into place at the right time and people are not sitting around becoming disinterested and able to take action in the way you want them to. And lastly, the fourth reason, and we've all seen this, is sometimes you have an experience gap or you have maybe a talent gap. So you have to bring in certain subject matter experts to shore up what you're trying to do. You maybe hire a consultant to come in and talk to your people about implementing an IT system. Maybe it's some sort of engineering program, CAD or something like this. You're moving. I did that. We went from 2D to 3D CAD. We had an outsourced consultant that helped us do that, do some training. If you don't have strategic experts or strategic thinkers in your organization, you may want to bring some people in. Or if you can't bring people in, then it's just going to take you longer to plan that out yourself. The two categories of planning in the book are force planning and operational planning. And I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but operations planning would be something like specific objective that you want to accomplish. This could be like a campaign, like a sales campaign or marketing campaign where you're going after certain accounts, you're being very specific, and you're tailoring your actions to something like a external focus, like a client, like I said, or account or something like that. And then you have force planning, which is when you're taking a look at your organization. Think about this in terms of reorganization efforts that you might have done. You're going to take a look at what your team needs to be able to do in the future, and you're going to review and plan for that team to bring people in, or maybe you're going to need to retrain people, or maybe you're just going to have to let some people go because you don't need that skill set anymore. That's force planning. A quick note on the word strategy. I've been using it a little bit here in this video and then the other ones, but strategy really is an overused term, and I'm going to get into describing the different levels of war. Strategy requires a lot of time. You know, if you need something done by Friday, you don't think that's not really a strategy. That's more of a tactical mindset. And I'll get into that a little bit more. When you say that you need a strategic effort or you need to put together a strategic plan, you want that to something. So if you're using it every day, it's going to lose a little bit of its meaning. One way we start to plan is we create what's called an outline plan, and that is very generic, but it covers like the main areas that you're going to need to execute in the future. and it's not real detailed, but it does give you a structure for how to construct a little more detailed plan, which is one of the principles of planning, in that you're going to use the amount of time that you have available. So planning is scalable. You don't necessarily start out knowing that you need 3 months to do it, 3 weeks or 3 hours. You're going to take a look at the time you have available. You're going to come up with the best plan you can. Yeah. And again, to save that time, you're going to start with the commander or the leader of the organization, giving their guidance on what they want to see. Maybe not in a lot of detail, but just you want to understand what's going on in their head. And then you have different time horizons that you're planning for. So to put it in perspective, what I was saying with regard to overusing the word strategy, like a strategy, to me, just generically speaking, it could change, but it could be different for your organization. Like if you have a 3-year transformation for your organization, you're moving into new capabilities, you're going to take a whole different look at recruiting and hiring people with different skills. That 3-year outlook, that's a strategy. That's a conversely, if you're talking about what we got to do this week, that's more of a tactical plan. So you're going to have, that's where your managers really are going to be your money makers with the team, and they're going to they're executing. No, they need to make a certain number of products per week. They're going to be able to measure that. Their mission is to put 300 units out by Friday at 4:00, and that's tactical. And then in the middle, you have operational, and this is, again, the things I visited or talked about in the warfighting videos, but the operational is when you say, I have a strategic plan with objectives, and then at the bottom, I have my tactical. I have my managers that are making sure the work gets done every week. Well, how does that work getting done every week translate into getting us to achieve our strategic goals? That's the middle. That's the most difficult to understand. That's the operational level of war, or you may think of it as the operational level of maybe planning in your organization, if you wanted to put a construct to it. And to demonstrate this military example, the two extremes. The first picture I have up here is the combined action platoon program in Vietnam. This was mid-60s, where Marine squads, or about 10, 12 Marines, would go into a Vietnamese village. They would live with the locals. They would help them secure their areas, keep the bad guys away. And what you see, that's a form of planning, is you got probably a sergeant talking to some of the locals, and they're figuring out what they're going to do for that day or what happened last night. And then the next picture I'm going to put up here, this is, of course, you recognize the people there. That's the White House Situation Room. That's the highest level of strategic planning. So both of them fundamentally have a lot of the same elements. They differ in scope, the amount of time required, the amount of resources that are impacted, and on and on. So what does the product look like from these two different types of plans? In the first picture, probably just a common understanding. Here's what we're going to do today. Here's what we're going to do in the next 48 hours. White House Situation Room, you're going to have reams of paper being produced. You're going to have electronic communications. You're going to have, so the plans, the product of the planning is scalable too, and it varies depending on how much information is needed to be conveyed and the time available to do so. I haven't talked a lot about command and control in these videos yet. We're going to do that. That's a really good topic to talk about. But planning facilitates command and control, in that when we are laying out a plan, we're going to talk about who's working for who tells who to do what. And if you look at your organization, I suspect that you have some confusion there on who does what part of a project, or what part of the manufacturing process falls under which leader on the floor, or where does quality tie in, or when does engineering come in, and that kind of thing. So it's going to help us think through where we need to clarify those types of what we call in the Marine Corps or the military command relationships. And in your organization, it would just simply be maybe it's a RACI matrix, who's for what. The expression that I learned as a planner in the Marine Corps was, when you're constructing a large-scale plan, you never move past the command relationship diagram until it's completely understood and clear enough to see the execution of your plan in it. So you first figure out who's working for who and who's telling who to do what. And until you know that, you don't move. You don't get into any that's got some applicability for what you're dealing with. Review question: who's the most important planner in the team? The commander, the leader of the organization. But what the planning team does is it gives the leader options, or what they call in the military courses of action. So Here's what we're trying to achieve. Here's what we can do. We have to do. We can't do. Okay, boss, here's 3 things. Here's 3 we could accomplish that. So courses of action, that might be one way to think about in your organization. If you got people working up plans, if they're locked in a conference room, they come back to you with a couple of options. And they should do that because you're the one that's going to make the decision if you're the leader. And one of the things that the leader is going to think about is not just, am I solving the problem for today? And remember, that's what your managers get paid to do. That's what you should support them in doing. What you get paid to do, the more senior you get, is to ensure the long-term success of the organization. And that's why you would invest time in doing these plans and having these people give you different options that you could consider, because you have a vision for the future, and nobody knows, really what's going to happen. Responsibilities on your shoulders. If you're the senior person in the organization, if you're the leader, you got to take that responsibility. You're going to have to be the one that makes that decision, and you're going to be responsible for the results. But it's only fitting that you would get a couple of options to pick from during the planning process. Another really interesting part of the book, it talks about how we adapt to our surroundings. The 2 ways we do that are by anticipation or improvisation. We do want to be more anticipatory in our execution, which means our planning effort needs to suit that as well. Improvisation is when you take action in events that is not planned. Maybe you're starting an organization. What you want to do is you want to anticipate as much as possible, which is giving you that range of options, things that could happen that you've already thought through, and you've got an idea of what you want to do to address it. So like I said, neither inherently better or worse. It depends on really how much time you have to act. And if you have a short amount of time, likely you're going to improvise more. Where you don't want to be is when you have plenty of time, but you're still improvising because you're not doing the work, putting the rigor into planning to anticipate what could happen and getting your people ready for it. What do plans do for us? Firstly, they help us direct and coordinate actions. When we establish priorities, when we think about things over time, they're going to give us the framework to direct what we want people to do. And this could be one of the areas where we go a little bit too far. And one of the classic misunderstandings of what you're trying to do in planning is you're over-scripting what people are doing. You're about the future and you're preparing your people how to think about situations, but that can be misunderstood in that you're predicting what's going to happen in the future, and the plan is going to go 1, 2, 3, just like it's written. And that's overstepping. That's not what we're talking about when we say anticipation. The second function of planning is that it gives everybody a shared context or a shared understanding of what's important. Depending on how detailed it is, going to tell them what to do at certain points in time. Does everybody have the same shared understanding of where you want them to go or where you want them to be? Probably not. So the more time you're planning and communication of that plan to the team, the more shared understanding. And if you have shared understanding, you have teamwork, and we have good, seamless teamwork, you're faster. Your tempo's high. You're likely going to outpace your competition. Or another way of thinking about it is if you don't have that, you're probably going to get run over. Third thing is you're going to generate some expectations in the team of what should happen and what they should be looking for. So it's a little bit like anticipating. It's being agile. It's being ready to exploit the success. How do you develop your metrics? This could be one way to look at planning, is that it's going to show you how can you tell if you're on track, if you're making progress towards your strategic goals or your operational goals. So if you think about the Schlieffen plan map that I showed, and remember the basis of the plan, the railroad timetable, so that you can move people and equipment over large distances. You could put a metric on that to say we need to move 10,000 troops 100 kilometers a day. And you could monitor that. And if you're falling behind, then the plan isn't working, and adapt. For you, it might be something like a revenue plan, monthly revenue or quarterly revenue. Are we on track to meet our goals for the year? Same thing. Fourth thing is we're facilitating people taking initiative because they know the framework, they know the goals, they know the priorities of what's important and what's not. It's things like this when you support them in executing as well as they can and helping them be successful and helping the team be successful, which is really what people want. That's why they come to work. They don't come to work to be friends with their boss. They come to work to be successful and make themselves better. And the last one is by planning, you're gonna really sharpen the minds of the people that are participating in that. And you as a leader, maybe you're the leader of the whole organization, it's really going to help you as well. You're going to keep in mind things like top-down guidance, bottom-up refinement, back planning, looking at time. You're going to learn better to look at things in terms of time and space, resource allocation, and priorities. Toward the end of the chapter, there's a bunch of different plans that they go into, and I will just kind of break it down in a couple of different ones. You have strategic plans, that's kind of the highest level goals of the organization, framing that out over maybe a year, 2, 3 years. I like 3 years, what we're going to do and why and how we're going to get there, a little bit about how we're going to get there. And then you have all the way down to just kind of very informal plans like that. The cap platoon is a good one, good way of looking at that. And then you have functional plans, which are not necessarily based on a client or a client objective, but they're functional. They're going to be the way that you do business in terms of like SOPs or standard operating procedures for business. A functional plan in that regard is this is how we do purchasing. This is how we release engineering documentation. This is our standard for customer communications, things like that. Those are functional plans. They're not generic necessarily. That's probably not the way to think about it, but they apply to like probably all client or customer situations in their broad scope. Where does uncertainty fit into the picture here? The longer out that you're going to plan, the more uncertainty you're going to have. So you probably need more time to plan, but it's important to realize that just because you spend a lot of time planning, you're never going to get rid of the uncertainty entirely. So you're always going to have a team that's able to operate amidst that chaos. You as the leader, you need to be able to do that as well and set the example and stay steady and calm and clear-eyed and inspire people to hang in there even when the chips are down. So planning is not going to get rid of all of that. It's going to help with it. In fact, probably the best way to look at it, like the book says, is you're not going to eliminate it, but you're going to train yourself and your people to operate within it. A note about how much control you're going to have on the plan as is executing. It has more to do with the mentality of the commander or the leader. How much do they think they want to try to personally control, or how much of their personal will do they want to impose on the execution itself? The higher the expectation that for that, probably the more disappointed you're going to be. Now, there's going to be key elements that you probably want to have personal oversight of. That's fine. But if you just have a death grip on the entire plan and the execution, you're going to slow everything down. Going to be waiting on you to make decisions, or you're going to just totally demoralize the people in your team to the point where they just check out or they're indifferent. Their expression these days is they're not engaged. So you got to be really careful about the amount of control that you think you're going to have during execution. How do we misuse planning? We have too much optimism. You've probably seen this through the years. I've seen it as well, is when we're talking about something, and this is a little bit of our bias kicking in, we're almost like confirming what we wanted, and that's spilling over into our planning mentality, but you're overlooking reality. And there's one thing to make assumptions, and this is something that just came to me in the planning training that I've had way back, is you don't wish away reality assumptions. A good assumption is based on facts. It may be based things that you don't know yet, but it's not based on some sort of unrealistic assessment, something that will never happen. Another way we misuse planning or make mistakes in planning is we go for too much detail. The problem with detail, you do need detail at certain points. Detail is important, but it takes time. So you have to constantly balance. If you're leading a planning effort, we used to have operational planning teams, or OPTs, in the Marine Corps, where you would have somebody that's trained up in planning, and they would have a group of planners, and you'd go through and you'd do your planning with a plan and communicate it. But you can afford to get into as much detail as you have time to do so. And in fact, you should do that. You should use available time. But getting into too much detail can also backfire in that you're creating a false expectation during execution. So spend your time on the details that are really necessary. The ones that are unnecessary probably have to do with describing situations that might happen. Whereas what you should do is you spend more time on things that are more likely to happen. Third way is planning is not a script. That is if you go back to in the quote, once the first shot is fired, the whole plan goes to hell. That is what this is talking about, is it's not a script. If you think certain things, probably some things within the plan that are scripted, but the basis of the plan cannot be a script, because you have an enemy that is trying to defeat you. Your opposition, your competition, they are actively moving against you, and they're going to change the rules on you during the plan. And the last thing is, you have people on your that are used to doing things a certain way. They have experiences, and they're going to be biased probably towards bringing those what they call institutional methods or methods of thinking into the planning process. So the commander, the leader, has really got to be the one that watches for that, recognizes it, and counteracts that and says, we really want to have our eyes open here during this planning. So to wrap up this chapter, planning really is an art and a science. The science aspect of it is there's certain elements of the process that you want to learn how to do. When I learned planning initially, it was you spend a lot of time on mission analysis, called problem framing now, which is you take a look at what you have to do, what you can't do, what are the boundaries of what you can do, what resources don't you have that you need, and you take a look first at understanding what is being asked of you, and then you move into the more detailed courses of action development, or those options that you're presenting to the commander or to the leader. So there is some science to it. The art of it is really, I think, comes down to knowing where to spend your time and on what level of detail are you going to get into at certain points in the process. So the person to drive that is the leader, the commander. You might be, maybe you're just a manager of people, but you want to do some planning. You're going to be the one that needs to shape that. What you want, ideally, what you want the room to sound like is a lot of people talking, a lot of dialogue, but then you come in and you steer the dialogue where it needs to go. And that's a really good way to envision maybe like kind of a lower level manager planning effort. And the opposite of that would be you're doing all the talking and people are just checked out. They're not listening. Let's envision planning as seeing want for the future, and then coming up with the methods and the ways we think we're going to do that. We got to recognize that the commander or the leader is the most important planner. They're the person that's going to tell us what success looks like. Think of things in terms of that. What does success look like? You're going to talk about planning in terms of top-down guidance, which is what I was just saying. You have the leader fully involved. They don't have to be involved for the whole thing. They can go away, but they got to be involved early and up front. They're going to say, here's what success looks like. Here's some things I want to make sure we do. Here's some things I want to make sure definitely we don't do. And then the executors are going to refine that from the bottom up. And a good way, and I should have mentioned this, a good way of looking up refinement is you have their sales team is proposing a large sale, but the execution team needs to come in and review the proposal to say, we can do that, we can't do that, the timeline is realistic, it's not. That's not necessarily the commander, the leader, or it could be, but what you have is you have a refinement of the initial plan by the people who are participating in it. So top-down guidance, bottom-up refinement, and the longer out you're planning for, the more complicated, the more uncertainty you're going to have. And then just remember, you're always going to have uncertainty. So planning is not going to eliminate the uncertainty. It should just better equip the leader and the team to be able to deal with things when they come up. If becoming a better planner is something that you're interested in, or if your team needs to plan, if you need somebody to facilitate that, I do stuff like that. That's what I've been trained to do. My information is down in the footer of the video, in the profile too. Happy to help. Get a hold of me anytime. Thanks.